The river ran quiet beneath the weight of the sky, its current slipping past as though they knew better than to linger in one place. Dust still clung to Eli Harper's boots from the trail, his horse's hooves worn from miles that seemed endless. The West had a way of hollowing men out, filling them with silence instead of song, whiskey instead of joy. Eli had long grown used to it, or at least he told himself he had. But that evening, when the sun burned the horizon into copper and blood, something shifted that even he wasn't ready for. He had stopped at the river with no thought beyond quenching his thirst. The cottonwoods reached crooked arms toward the sky, and the water shimmered with the last light of the day. Eli knelt at the edge, scooping a handful to his cracked lips. The coolness startled him, shocking his throat with a relief he hadn't felt in weeks. He closed his eyes, listening to the hush of water slipping over stone, when he caught it, soft, almost fragile. A sound, not animal, not the harsh scrape of boots or rifles, but something finer, lighter. Every instinct in him stiffened. His fingers brushed the handle of his revolver where it rested at his hip. The frontier taught men that curiosity could end in a shallow grave, but his legs carried him anyway, parting the brush with cautious steps. And then he saw her. She was there in the bend of the river, the water rising just to her waist, her body framed in the fading light as though the sun itself had chosen her as its final canvas. Her hair, dark and heavy from the water, spilled down her back, clinging to her like ribbons of ink. Droplets trailed along her bare shoulders, catching the fire of the sunset. She wasn't rushing, wasn't guarded, she was simply moving, dipping her arms, running her fingers through the current as though the whole world had fallen away. Eli's chest constricted. He should have turned right then. A man of honor would have. But his boots anchored him to the dirt, his breath tangled in his throat. He had seen beauty before in the curve of mountains and the stretch of wildflower fields after rain, but never like this, never in the form of a woman who looked untouched by the cruelty that stalked the land. His hands curled against the bark of the tree beside him, rough skin scraping wood as if to ground himself in reality. And then her head turned. Her eyes found him through the thinning light, and the illusion shattered. Her gasp was sharp, cutting through the calm of the river. She froze, then with a sudden urgency pulled her arms across her chest, water splashing around her as she shielded herself. But it wasn't shame that burned in her eyes, it was fire. A storm gathered there, dark and unyielding, and Eli felt the heat of it strike him harder than any bullet. His mouth opened, but the words failed him. Instead, it was his body that betrayed him. His hands lifted instinctively, palms out, a gesture of surrender that came before his tongue could form an apology. They shook slightly, betraying nerves he hadn't felt since he was a boy. "Don't," she warned, her voice unsteady but strong. "Don't you come closer." Her tone rooted him deeper than the tree behind him. Eli lowered his eyes, shame crawling over him in thick waves. He hadn't meant harm, but intent didn't matter now. What mattered was what she saw, a stranger, a drifter, standing silent when he should have walked away. He swallowed hard, throat dry. "I didn't mean," his voice cracked, rough as gravel. "I wasn't." "You were," she cut in, sharper now. "You were watching." The accusation was true, and the weight of it landed like iron in his gut. He couldn't lie, not here, not with her eyes holding him accountable in a way no man ever had. He lowered his gaze further, turning slightly, giving her his shoulder in what meager dignity he could offer. "You've my word," he muttered. "I'll ride out and never breathe a word of this." Silence pressed heavy between them, broken only by the rush of the river. He expected her to curse him, to tell him to go faster, to spit her anger into the dirt. Instead, a softer word slipped from her lips. "Wait." Eli froze. Slowly, he turned his head back, careful as though any sudden move would scare her off like a wild mare. She was climbing from the water now, a thin wool blanket pulled hastily around her frame. Her hair dripped down her shoulders, darker now against the pale fabric. Her face flushed with color, whether from anger or embarrassment, he couldn't tell. But beneath the tension, there was something else, caution mixed with a strange kind of plea. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands clutching the blanket. He straightened, keeping his distance, and tipped the brim of his worn hat. "Eli Harper, drifter, just passing through." Her eyes narrowed, studying him as though weighing each word. The storm in them didn't fade, but curiosity flickered there, cautious and reluctant. "Clara," she said finally. "Clara Hayes." Her lips pressed together before she added, "If you're truly just passing through, then maybe you'll do me a favor before you go." Eli tilted his head, suspicion tugging at him, though not enough to mask the strange pull he already felt toward her. What kind of favor? She clutched the blanket tighter, but her chin lifted with quiet resolve. My brother owes a debt. To men who don't forgive and don't wait. They'll come looking, and when they do, I can't face them alone. You look like the kind of man who knows trouble. The words hung heavy, as if the river itself had stilled to hear them. Eli's jaw tightened. Trouble was all he had ever known. It followed him from town to town, rode beside him like a shadow, and left scars on his skin and heart alike. He should have told her no. He should have turned, mounted his horse, and vanished back into the wilderness. But the way she stood there, trembling but unbroken, changed something in him. She wasn't begging, she wasn't weeping, she was simply asking him to stand beside her, if only for a little while. His chest rose and fell with a long, heavy breath. At last, he said, low and rough, all right. I'll stay, just for a while. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise flashing before she masked it with resolve. She nodded once, as though sealing an agreement neither of them fully understood yet. Eli shifted, pulling the brim of his hat lower to hide the war still raging across his face. He didn't know what this promise meant, or why he had made it. All he knew was that walking away wasn't an option anymore. Not from her, not from the storm she carried in her eyes. And in the glow of the dying sun, with the river whispering its secrets at their feet, two lives had already begun to entwine, bound not by words but by a moment neither would ever forget. The days that followed tested Eli Harper in ways he hadn't expected. He told himself he was staying only for a few nights, that once the danger passed, he would be back on the trail with nothing but his horse in the horizon for company. But every morning, when he stepped outside the small cabin by the river and saw Clara already awake, her hair pulled back, her sleeves rolled, determination etched across her face, he found one more reason not to leave. The cabin itself was a modest thing, walls patched in places with mismatched planks, roof tarred against leaks. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the hearth smoked if you didn't set the logs just right. Yet, it held a kind of warmth Eli hadn't felt in years, warmth that had nothing to do with fire and everything to do with the woman who lived there. Clara carried herself like someone who had learned the cost of pride but still refused to surrender it. She stacked firewood until her palms blistered, fixed her own fences when the rails buckled, and scrubbed laundry against the stones at the river until her arms ached. Eli began to notice the smaller things. How she hummed under her breath when she worked, not loud enough to be a song, just a quiet tune to keep her company. How she always checked the window at night before blowing out the lamp, her eyes scanning the darkness for shadows that might hide men with debts to collect. How, even when fear flashed in her gaze, she never let it keep her still. At first, Eli kept his distance. He chopped wood when she wasn't looking, fixed the squeak in the cabin door without saying a word, brought water in from the river so she wouldn't have to carry the heavy buckets alone. It was easier to help silently than to speak, because words didn't come easy to him. Years of wandering, of losing people, had turned his voice into a thing he rarely trusted. But Clara noticed anyway. She always did. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, they sat on the porch steps as the sun bled red across the hills. The quiet stretched between them, easy now, the kind that hummed instead of pressed. Clara wrapped her arms around her knees and stared at the horizon. They'll come soon, she whispered, her words barely louder than the cicadas in the grass. Eli leaned back against the porch post, hat tipped low. He didn't need to ask who she meant. Then I'll be here when they do, he said simply. Her head turned, her eyes catching his. They were stormy, the kind that warned of thunder but also promised rain to thirsty ground. Why? She asked, voice thick with something that wasn't just suspicion. You don't owe me anything. No, Eli said, meeting her gaze. His voice was rough, but steady. But maybe I owe myself a chance at being more than a ghost on horseback. Clara blinked, as if she hadn't expected honesty from him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached out, her hand brushing the back of his. Just a graze, quick as the flicker of firelight, but enough to send something sharp and alive through his chest. Neither of them spoke of it, but neither of them pulled away either. That night, Eli lay awake on the floor by the hearth, the shadows flickering across the cabin walls. Sleep wouldn't come, not with the thought of riders somewhere out there, men with cold eyes and quicker guns. But beneath the worry was another thought that troubled him more, the memory of Clara's hand against his, the unspoken promise in that simple touch. The trouble came sooner than either of them hoped. It started with the sound of hooves echoing through the valley, a dull thunder rolling closer as the moon rose high. Eli was on his feet in an instant, revolver drawn, eyes narrowing against the lantern glow that bobbed between the trees. Clara stirred from her bed, pulling her shawl around her shoulders, fear flashing across her face. She didn't scream, didn't panic. Instead, she walked to Eli's side, her hand finding his arm. "Don't kill unless you have to," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her lips. Eli looked down at her, surprised by her plea. Killing was second nature to a man like him, survival etched into muscle and instinct. But there was something in her eyes, a faith, fragile but real, that made him nod. "I'll try," he murmured. The riders came into view, 5 of them, their horses snorting and pawing the dirt. Shadows cut across their faces, but their voices carried sharp through the night. "Clara Hayes," one called, his tone mocking. "Your brother thought he could cheat us. He was wrong. Now the debt's yours." Clara stiffened, but Eli stepped forward, his figure tall in the lantern light. His revolver gleamed at his side, but he didn't raise it yet. "She doesn't owe you a damn thing," he said, voice low and steady, carrying the kind of weight that made men hesitate before reaching for iron. The leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "And who the hell are you?" "Some drifter she found to keep her bed warm." Eli's jaw clenched, but his grip stayed steady. "I'm the man standing between you and her. That's all you need to know." Tension cracked the night wide open. Words gave way to snarls, then fists, then the inevitable flash of steel and gunfire. The fight was chaos, shouts, the thunder of hooves, the crack of Eli's revolver. He fought with the precision of a man who'd been forged in survival, each shot and strike measured, not wasteful. Clara, though terrified, didn't hide. She darted to the cabin, fetching a rifle her father once owned, standing in the doorway with trembling hands but unyielding resolve. By the time the first light of dawn touched the sky, the valley was quiet again. The riders were gone, some fled, some wounded, one left behind in the dirt, groaning but alive. Eli leaned against the porch post, chest heaving, revolver still warm in his grip. Clara stood barefoot on the porch steps, hair loose, cheeks streaked with dirt and tears, but her chin was high. She sank onto the steps, her body weary, and without hesitation let her head rest against Eli's shoulder. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the river's endless whisper, as if it were carrying their silence away with it. Eli looked down at her, something breaking loose in him that he hadn't known was still chained. His hands, for once, didn't betray him. They didn't shake, didn't reach out with hunger or shame. They simply held her, steady and sure, giving her what comfort he could. And when he finally spoke, the words came clear and certain. "You're not alone anymore, Clara," he whispered into the dawn. "Not as long as I've breath in me." She didn't answer right away, but the way she leaned against him, the way her hand slipped into his, said more than words could. For the first time in years, Eli felt something he thought had been lost forever. Not just purpose, not just duty, hope. And as the sun rose over the battered cabin, painting the river gold, Eli Harper realized he had found something far rarer than peace on the trail. He had found a reason to stay.